Hello everyone, Neila here. Welcome to another episode of LoreLines. Wow, 6.2 is just around the corner. No lie, the moment I finished the 6.0 Pandæmonium quests, I wanted the next part now, and it's felt like forever to get here. And it has been a while. If you're eagerly looking forward to the next part of Pandæmonium, but time has left you a bit fuzzy on the details, time to check out New Game Plus. Oh wait, it's not available yet. Guess you'll have to sit tight with me while I break it down and toss out a few theories for the wild freaks. Our Pandæmonium journey begins in Sharlayan, with a quest titled The Crystal from Beyond. A practical Lalafell by the name of Nemgigi invites us to Aporia, where we meet Professor Claudian. We learn that his particular field of expertise is the ethereal sea itself. In fact, he's considered the most knowledgeable Sharlayan on the subject. It was he and his cohorts who used the Anti-Tower to speak with Hydaelyn and learned of the final days from her, back before they abandoned the colony of New Sharlayan, now known as Idleshire. Claudian reveals that they received an insanely dense and plainly man-made crystal an unspecified number of months ago. Or rather, that such a crystal was propelled to the surface of the ethereal sea directly before them. If that seems a touch suspicious to you, then same, and also I'll delve into theories at the end of the video. Of course, those of you who paid close attention during 5.3 likely recognize the shape of that crystal. It looks just like the convocation crystals we gave to Elidibus, aside from having no constellation or other identifying mark on it. When the Warrior of Light picks up the crystal, a faint voice issues forth with a broken message about Pandæmonium, star, danger. Claudian, in a fascinating turn of events, knows enough of the ancient tongue to recognize that Pandæmonium means all demons. He realizes investigating this Pandæmonium requires a trip far into the past, to a time before the Sundering. He tasks the Warrior of Light with returning to the past to find out where and what Pandæmonium is, and whether the present is indeed in the danger the crystal's message seems to imply. He entrusts us with the crystal, hoping that more memories may be drawn out as we approach their source. Could this be relevant to the beginning of the next portion of Pandæmonium's questline? We'll see soon. In order to once again travel to the past, the Warrior of Light returns to the first, to the Ocular. The message comes through more strongly as we travel back once more, but instead of arriving in Propylion, we fall into an anime trope. We make a dynamic entry onto the scene by falling directly upon poor Themis. As a side note for English-only players, in French, German, and Japanese he is referred to as young man with soft or gentle eyes before he gives his name. Themis nearly takes us for a friend before realizing he must be mistaken, and if you choose to say that you are Asm's familiar, he will reply that perhaps his initial impression was not so preposterous after all. More on this later. Themis guesses that we are here to investigate Pandæmonium, and asks to know how we came to collide with his skull. Our explanation seems to satisfy him. He makes a cryptic comment about how we all have secrets we must keep, and asks to see the crystal that brought us here. He immediately senses memories stirring within, recognizing that they speak of something gravely amiss in Pandæmonium, much as we did. From him, we learn that Pandæmonium is a facility beneath Elpis, overseen by the words of La Habrea. It houses creations that are important research subjects, but highly dangerous to the star. Several days before our arrival, an unnatural shift in the ether surrounding Pandæmonium was detected, and not long after that, all communication from Pandæmonium stopped. Themis tells us he is a representative of an organization that works directly with the Convocation, and that he has been tasked with investigating this incident. He invites the Warrior of Light to join his investigation in the place of his friend, who decided to step out since involving two members of the organization might raise unwanted questions. While he had decided to proceed alone, this friend, whose pronouns oh so conveniently matched the Warrior of Light's, cluing us into their identity, promised him that a star would fall before him, hinting at our coming involvement in his quest. He requests that we join him in his investigation, promising that he can gain us both access, and we proceed to Ananoresis to secure permission to enter Pandæmonium. After a cryptic comment about how fascinating the Warrior of Light's etheric signature is, the words of La Habrea speaker grants us leave to observe Pandæmonium in accordance with the Convocation's request. When we mention that we know La Habrea, the speaker is surprised that a mere familiar has met with someone as busy and important as him. It likewise intrigues Themis enough that he lets slip that he too has met La Habrea directly. We activate the overgrown teleporter on the final Isle of Elpis, which you might recognize as the same teleporter we passed while trying to track Medion down when Emet-Selch was following us. This brings us into Pandæmonium proper, where Themis dashes all hopes that things might be even remotely okay. Someone, or something, is tampering with the protections about Pandæmonium. Fortunately, Themis has the ability to reinforce these protections, although as we soon find out, that means he cannot risk joining us in battle, since this magic requires his constant attention. But that's alright, because he can use creation magic to make illusory allies to aid us in our battles. This proves fortunate because no sooner does he make the offer, but the first fight of Asphodelos unlocks, and we find ourselves facing down a confused, transformed warder. A couple intriguing light and fire mechanics later, our new friend Erichthonios returns to his senses and begins to explain the situation. He describes his mind being overtaken by a storm of emotion, desperation and anger. Surely that doesn't relate to Dynamis, of course, or whatever alteration in the ether was detected some days ago. At any rate, he explains that the creations interred in Asphodelos have been set loose, and that his attempts to contain the chaos have been thwarted by a chorus of whispers overwhelming him, from which the Warrior of Light had proven instrumental in awakening him. Themis says this sounds like mind-affecting magic, and explains to him what we already know. Erichthonios asks what would happen if the Convocation knew what had occurred in Pandæmonium. Themis says they would likely consider it a lost cause, cutting off all ties from it to the world, or perhaps even obliterating it. Erichthonios is determined not to leave the other warders behind and begs Themis not to say anything until he's had a chance to try and fix things. As Themis's protections have bought the group some time, it is decided to go deeper in and properly investigate. As we listen at the gates, Erichthonios admits that he intends to save the creations as well as the warders. We also get a tidbit of La Habrea lore, as Erichthonios describes him as seemingly incapable of smiling. He tells us a bit about the previous chief keyword of Pandæmonium, namely that her name was Athena, she was a researcher with the words of La Habrea, and that she both mentored him and appointed him to the position of warder. Erichthonios goes on to explain a bit about the spells they use in Pandæmonium, namely Ethereal Shackles, which he uses in his fight with us, and Interment, which is a more advanced and powerful spell of the same general type. Only the keywords are allowed to use Interment, although this is far from an ordinary situation. It seems Themis is familiar as well. He tells us that La Habrea established the foundation of these spells, and explains a bit more about how they work. However, he doesn't have the expertise to cast the spells, only general knowledge of them. They devise a plan to use Themis' power to supplement Erichthonios' knowledge and try to reinter the wayward creations. Erichthonios knows of one creation that was off on its own, the Hippocampus. We weaken it in battle, and together Themis and Erichthonios inter it. The party regroups at the gates once more. Observing that we've still seen no sign of any other warders, Erichthonios guesses that the keyword of Asphodelos, Hesperos, must have brought them somewhere safe. He tells us about him, his knowledge of the creatures in his domain, his care and consideration for his warders, and his mastery of magic. Discussing how to proceed, Erichthonios informs us that in order to get to where the other warders most likely have gathered, we will have to get past the Phoenix. Themis tells us that the perfected version of the concept was a fiery bird with eternal life and amazing restorative powers. This one, however, is filled with fury and seeks to burn the world to ash. Fortunately, fighting it in a barren corridor should be easy enough, since that doesn't make a terribly hospitable environment for it. And if that had been how things went down, it would have been an easy fight. Unfortunately, a cloaked figure with a familiar face approaches. Themis senses him, turning just in time to see as he transforms the hallway into a scorched landscape far more suited to the Phoenix's nature. The group retreats, and we prepare to do battle in an orange hell. Once the Phoenix is defeated and interred, Themis and Erichthonios discuss the transformation of the arena. They point out that there is only one person with the ability and authority to wield creation magics, and any doubt on the point is soon banished by Hesperos' arrival. Erichthonios asks him why he has thrown his beloved Asphodelos into chaos. In response, Hesperos heaps abuse on him, calling him dim and mediocre. He also reveals that Erichthonios is La Habrea's son, calling him wasted potential for his lack of magical skill. We find out that Hesperos has become a hemitheos, merged with their mythic creations and rid of imperfections, whatever that means. Then he tries to inter the group. Fortunately, Themis is a capable mage, and he has been paying attention to Erichthonios as he interred the creations we defeated. He is able to shatter the spell, rebuking Hesperos for being blind to Erichthonios' talent, the reason Themis was able to break us free. The group retreats once more to the gates, leaving Hesperos to monologue cryptically about his plans. Erichthonios is, understandably, not having the best time of it. Themis hopes discussing what troubles him will help. When we approach, he speaks of how the vast ward surrounding Pandæmonium was created by none other than Lahabrea. He acknowledges that he is indeed his son, saying that the ability to bind others in chains is perhaps the only thing they have in common. Themis guesses, correctly, that Athena is his mother, and Erichthonios explains that she invited him to join her here at Pandæmonium. It seems Lahabrea had nothing to do with the decision, and Themis asks if his mother was already chief keyword, why his father would take over from her. Erichthonios explains that his mother is no longer among the living, bitterly lamenting how Lahabrea seemed all too eager to assume her responsibilities without even pausing to mourn her. Themis shares what he knows of Lahabrea, namely his public face, admitting that while he maintains his composure in difficult circumstances, he also does come across as cold. Erichthonios requests a change in topic. Themis recognizes the wisdom of this, since we have more pressing matters at hand in the form of Hesperos. Given his strange behavior and transformation, as well as the lack of other warders, they guess he has locked them away beyond our reach. And now he's expecting us as well. The wisest course of action is to seek him out next, rather than waste time chasing down other creations. Erichthonios points out that, as he's become one with the creations, he might prove vulnerable to interment. Themis asks if Erichthonios thinks confinement is enough after what he's done. Erichthonios responds that he wants to understand why he would do this. He is plainly distraught over, and suspicious of, this change in Hesperos' behavior. After all, Lahabrea is Pandæmonium's chief keyword. How would throwing it into disarray win his favor? The Warrior of Light is given a chance to weigh in, and it is decided. The party will try to confine him, only striking him down if that proves impossible. Erichthonios observed Hesperos to have the fangs of the Vrikolakas, a beast which feeds off its prey's ether, telling us that it is likely this creation which Hesperos has merged himself with. The Vrikolakas, plural Vrikolakes, is an undead creature from Greek folklore that is the equivalent of the vampire from the folklore of nearby Slavic countries. Of course, as the keyword of Asphodelos, Hesperos can change the environment at will, making the battle a difficult one. But in the end he falls, and just as before, Erichthonios and Themis team up to cast the interment spell. Alas, Hesperos is still a master of binding magics, shattering the spell just as Themis had before. Still weakened, he proclaims his defiance, saying his secrets will return to the star with him. Themis is unmoved, pointing out that it is we who have the upper hand. Hesperos remains defiant, and under the influence of his magic, his sword rises, flying to pierce him through the heart. With his dying breath he declares his loyalty, dissolving into glimmering motes of ether. With bowed heads, the group mourns the tragedy of his transformation and death, and none, it seems, more than Erichthonios. He cannot understand how the kindly keyword who guided him became this twisted and hateful creature, and even Themis' words about infatuation with Lahabrea and jealousy toward him prove little comfort. With surprising wisdom, he acknowledges his own capacity for bitterness, admitting that he too knows what it is to have someone you look to for guidance, and how it feels to lose them. Drawing out of his reverie, he suggests the party next turn their attentions to rounding up the creations and finding the other warders. Themis informs us that, with the influence of Hesperos' magic over Asphodelos fading, he can seize control and restore things to how they should be. In a display of power and magical mastery that awes Erichthonios, he does just that, but in doing senses a presence. Something stirs in Abyssos, and just as the party turns to look at the passage before them, it is blocked by a warding sigil. As Themis says, this investigation is far from over, and the group returns to the gates to apprise the situation from there. The consensus is that Hesperos was more victim than mastermind of this crisis, and that the origin may be somewhere deeper even than Abyssos. Themis postulates that Erichthonios' confused mind and muddled emotions were likely caused by a powerful magical influence. He speculates this same magic could have twisted Hesperos' affection for Lahabrea into burning obsession. If he was then made an offer of power, he would not be able to refuse it, resulting in the Hemitheos transformation we saw. Erichthonios points out that this likely means more warders will be transformed into Hemitheoi. He's plainly worried about his comrades, and Themis reassures him by pointing out that the fact that Hesperos challenged us alone implies that the process is a difficult and time-consuming one. We have time yet, though the party will have to find some way through the ward. Themis says that though this investigation has proven more involved than anticipated, he still hopes to resolve it without resorting to outside help. Erichthonios asks if he intends to send a report to Lahabrea. Themis assures him he would first like to find a way into Abyssos, to see if they can find the other warders and identify the party responsible for their disappearance. Erichthonios seems grateful, though he admits he's not above asking La Habrea for help, if necessary, to save lives. We leave the two of them to finish reinterring the wayward creations and return to Aporia. There we report back to Claudian, regaling him with our exploits. The crystal itself remains a mystery, but he is as determined as ever to detangle it. Reaffirming our determination to see the matter through, we return the crystal to Claudian, who sends us off to rest while they continue to study it. He promises that, should they discover something else of interest, we will be the first to know of it, and we leave him to await the next series of Pandæmonium quests. Let's dive beneath the surface and take a look at some of the themes and information presented in this raid series, starting with the characters. The first ancient we meet calls himself Themis. If, like me, you weren't familiar with the name, Themis is the Greek goddess of justice and divine or natural law. The name means that which is put in place. The first thing we can gather from this is that the writers aren't bothering to stick with gender norms when naming the ancients, instead choosing whatever they believe will work best thematically. But is this really this character's name? Or is it merely an assumed name, one of the secrets he references which will make our journey more interesting? I believe this is indeed his true name. If we look back at the scenes in the post-6.0 MSQ Stinger, we see this person speaking of Pandæmonium. More to the point, we hear his voice, and it is unquestionably the voice of Elidibus, who, before sending us back to Elpis, stated in some confusion that he saw us there, but didn't, but did.
I saw you there. In Elpis. Alas, I dare not investigate in earnest before the coming of my guiding star.
So already we can safely infer this will be our Elidibus, the very one that became the heart of Zodiark, and by doing the raid quests, he sees us there. With this in mind, deity of the natural laws makes a lot more sense. We know from Final Fantasy XII that Zodiark is the keeper of precepts, or the keeper of the natural laws. It makes sense then why this Esper was chosen to be the one in Final Fantasy XIV who rewrote the natural laws of Aetheris to save the ancients from their doom. Choosing Themis as his core makes sense too, since in Greek mythology she presides over the same laws. That's not all, however. Themis presents himself as the representative of an organization that works directly with the Convocation. However, he wears white robes. As Hythlodaeus tells us in Endwalker, the only ancients who wear white robes are the seat of Elidibus and those who held public office and step down but remain behind as advisors. It symbolizes that the person's judgment is highly regarded. While it's possible he has somehow achieved trusted advisor status before becoming Elidibus, I think there's another explanation here. He speaks a few times about a friend whose pronouns match the Warrior of Light's own, meaning he can only be referring to Azim. This friend decided it would be unwise for both of them to go into Pandæmonium. In Themis' words, if two members of our organization were seen poking our heads about restricted facilities, it could raise questions, you see. This implies they are both part of the same organization. But Azim is a Convocation title. They must already be on the Convocation. So Themis must also be, being in the same organization. But why would he hide his position, if so? Let's return to what he told Erichthonios when he asked what the Convocation would do if they received word of what had transpired in Pandæmonium. Themis' response is rather bleak. Doubtless they would consider this place to be a lost cause. Pandæmonium's ties to the outside world would be severed, or perhaps it would be wiped from existence entirely. Setting aside that this wouldn't look very good for La Habrea, we later find out his son is in there. Even estranged, it seems likely he'd want to see his son, and as many of the warders as possible, rescued before it is cut off or destroyed. What's more, a line in the German localization of 5.3 implies that La Habrea may have worried that Elidibus would be too soft for his position. What better way to prove himself, and to win La Habrea over, than by doing him a massive favor like this? On top of this, the quest he gives us that takes us from Elpis to Pandæmonium is called Where Familiars Dare, which seems to be a reference to the movie Where Eagles Dare, about rescuing a general from a German castle during World War II. But could it be that this is set further in the past than our visit to Elpis and Endwalker? We did use the portal in the Ocular again, making a separate trip. However, that's just not possible. The entrance to Pandæmonium is in the same area of Elpis as Lethe, the last area we visited during our trip there in Endwalker. If this was set in the past, we would not yet have access to any of the teleporters, meaning we'd have no way to get to Pandæmonium. It must occur after the events of Elpis in Endwalker. With this in mind, in the side story Ere Our Curtain Falls, a certain grapes incident is discussed. This incident is also referenced in the Endwalker MSQ during our time in Elpis, and at the time of the short story, Elidibus was already in his seat upon the convocation. This explains the robes, but then why the white mask? As previously mentioned, if he came to Pandæmonium as a convocation member, it would draw attention. He might not be able to avoid sending a report that condemns the warders to die. By disguising his affiliation, he draws less attention and has more freedom in what he chooses to do. And it's easily enough managed. He could simply create a white mask, or he could merely glamour over his red one to make it appear white. After all, should something strip that disguise away at a critical moment, it would make for quite the dramatic reveal, would it not? It's worth considering this question from the meta-narrative side as well. For the player, white robes give us a hint that something is up, that he's different somehow. But a red mask would be a dead giveaway, removing any fun from the wondering. This particular combination gives us something to chew on, without spoiling the surprise immediately. After Themis, we next meet the warder Erichthonios. This is another name from Greek mythology. Erichthonios is noteworthy as being the offspring of Hephaestus attempting to seduce, and when that fails, rape, Athena. Here's hoping they don't lean into that particular angle. Many myths list Gaia as Erichthonios' mother, with Athena adopting him, but in Final Fantasy XIV at least we can reasonably say he's Athena's child. But only one father is ever given for Erichthonios, meaning we have a very strong guess at Lahabrea's true name, Hephaestus. And it is fitting, given that he's a master of creation magic. In mythology, Erichthonios was legendary as a ruler of ancient Athens. As a baby, he was hidden in a box and entrusted to 3 sisters. When they opened the box, against Athena's orders, they saw either a snake coiled around an infant or a half-snake, half-human infant. Looking at the upside-down figure in the 6.2 patch art, I cannot help but wonder if he might be the serpent coiled around Erichthonios, so to speak. Of course, Erichthonios' fight gives us more information about him. The chains he uses are a plain reference to his role as a warder, though how odd that they use that term instead of warden, which one would expect to be associated with a dungeon or prison. He changes the arena with an attack called Shining Cells. There the players face alternating fire and light mechanics in addition to the chains. This initially struck me as unusual, since I would expect to see fire mechanics alongside ice ones, such as in the Intemperance portion of his fight. The fire-light juxtaposition comes back in a big way in the Savage version of his fight. The normal mode attack Pitiless Flail gets upgraded to a Tank Buster with a special effect. Fire, True Flare for Pitiless Flail of Purgation, and a light, True Holy Stack for Pitiless Flail of Grace. If he reaches Enrage, his final line in the fight is, "Be imprisoned twixt light and flame." The fire connection makes sense. Lahabrea has again and again been associated with fire. This leaves the strong likelihood that Athena is associated with light. As for the ice and fire used in Intemperance, ice is the element most naturally inclined toward the umbral or light pole of the elemental diagram, so it may fit this as well. While he doesn't name her, Erichthonios speaks of his mother after Hesperos' death. He says, "I do understand what it is to have a beacon to follow in dark times, a person you trust to guide you true. How it is to desperately wish their light would fall upon you again." Once more he emphasizes her connection with light. However, there's more we can extrapolate from this. Athena's association with light ties the concept of grace to her, and Lahabrea's fire to purgation, a reference either to some sort of ritual cleansing or to purgatory itself. These concepts relate closely to how Erichthonios sees his parents. It's no coincidence. In a way, he feels caught between heaven and hell. In addition to the light and fire mechanics, he has 2 new types of shackling attacks, Shackles of Loneliness and Shackles of Companionship. I'd venture to say Erichthonios has felt himself trapped his whole life, first beneath his father's tutelage, Loneliness, and then with his comrades in Pandæmonium, the one place he seems to have fit in and been happy. The third and final character we meet in Pandæmonium is Hesperos, the keyword of Asphodelos. Hesperos is less a character in mythology and more the personification of the evening star, Venus. He is brother to Phosphoros, also known as Eosphoros, the morning star, which is Lucifer in Latin. However, since both stars are actually Venus, just in different portions of its orbit around the sun, it's possible the writers intend a more direct association with Lucifer than that of siblings. The quest where we confront Hesperos is called Who Wards the Warders. It is a reference to a well-known phrase from Latin, Who Guards the Guards, meaning that those in the position to supervise others may themselves not be subject to the same scrutiny. It certainly fits what has happened to keyword Hesperos, who was instrumental in throwing Asphodelos into chaos. As we would expect of a keyword, he wields the powers of creation against us, transforming the arena via a distinctively theater-flavored ability called Setting the Scene to perform various elemental attacks. He also uses the ether-consuming abilities of the Vrikolakas, drawing blood-red ether from the party and charging attacks into his cape, Chlamys, and sword, Beloni. To be precise, Beloni means needle, and we can tell it refers to the sword because of the way it glows red when he executes certain attacks, but it likely also refers to his vampiric fangs. Hesperos uses a number of Greek-named attacks, which makes sense given the Greek theming the ancients have been given. Pinax, the one that precedes the execution of his elemental attacks, refers to, no, it's not what it sounds like, a votive object, that is, an object offered to represent the fulfillment of a vow, wish, or desire. Basically, he's proving his devotion to La Habrea each time he casts it. Thematically, Phase 1 of the Savage fight closely mirrors the normal mode. It is the transformation and second phase which really give us something new to sink our teeth into. For starters, the entire structure of the second part of the fight is a Greek tragedy. 4 acts, a finale, and the curtain call. This play is titled Acanthai, which means thorns. And this makes sense, because each act opens with a demonstration of what mechanics will occur, shown by twisted blood-red thorns placed on the arena, and thorny tethers which show their order. The mechanic Dark Design hints at secret plots, and the Tankbuster's near sight and far sight sure seem to explain why he wears glasses. Demigod's Double is another reference to theater, and Heartstake, of course, refers to his vampiric transformation. The significant thorn symbolism in this fight is only underscored by the arena itself. The second part of the fight seems to take place somewhere above Pandemonium. Islands in Elpis' style can be seen in the much lighter sky. The massive chains of the ward around Pandemonium are not far overhead, and everything is pierced by these large blood-red thorns. I don't think it's too far a stretch to infer that Hesperos became inextricably tangled in something terrible. There are also the creations themselves to consider. In this tier we fight and inter 2 creatures, the Hippocampus and the Phoenix. The quest in which we confront the Hippocampus is cleverly titled Under the Surface. The Hippocampus is a half-horse, half-fish monster from Greek mythology. Poseidon's carriage was drawn by Hippocampi in some accounts. However, Hippocampus is also the name given to a part of the brain, hinting at the secondary meaning of under the surface. As we go deeper into the questline, there are more and more hints surrounding the mind and the subconscious. These themes are only further emphasized by mechanics with names such as Murky Depths and Dissociation. The quest where we take on the Phoenix is called the Fires of Creation. It could refer to a volcano documentary, a fitting reference given that the grapes incident mentioned earlier involved a volcano and one of La Habrea's fiery masterworks, Ifrita. However, it could merely refer to the fiery aspect of the Phoenix and the fact that it is a creation. Unsurprisingly, the majority of the Phoenix's attacks involve fire. More interesting is that a number of them reference being experimental, and others involve darkened fire. The Tankbuster is also called Heat of Condemnation, which either calls back to the warder and imprisonment themes of Pandemonium, or refers to someone being condemned, perhaps by La Habrea. Partway through the fight, the Phoenix brings out ads, which become what look like eerie baby versions of itself after its attack, Dead Rebirth. I cannot help but wonder if this is related to Erichthonios' familial relationships, or even to a failed attempt to bring someone, such as Athena, back to life. Savage adds several new mechanics, most fire-flavored. The most interesting ones to me are Death's Toll and Life's Agonies, which occur one after another. Throughout the fight, the death and rebirth themes one would expect with the Phoenix are subverted in a most interesting way. Delving deeper into the theoretical, there is a lot of mystery surrounding Pandemonium. Why did Athena spearhead this project? La Habrea assisted her, most notably with the wards around it, but until her passing, his only tie to it was that it was a project under the auspices of the words of La Habrea. Even after he takes over, Themis informs us he only rarely visits Pandemonium. And why does he seem not to mourn Athena? While it could be that he deals with grief by throwing himself into work, there may also be more to it. Come to think of it, why is Erichthonios bitter about La Habrea's apparent lack of grief? Hythlodaeus tells us that returning to the star is beautiful, always. And while a few NPCs in Elpis side quests grapple with the difficulty of mentors or friends returning to the star, Erichthonios' bitterness and grief are significant, and his anger at his father just as much so. It's certainly understandable to be sad, but to be angry about what should be beautiful seems incongruous. But what if Athena's passing was no planned return to the star? What if it was some tragic accident? After all, Erichthonios did not say she returned to the star, only that she was no longer with us. It would explain why he's so deeply grieved by it, and why La Habrea had to hurriedly take over the project instead of Athena taking her time to prepare and train a replacement, as one of the mentors in the Elpis side quests is doing with his assistant. Furthermore, what if Athena is not truly dead, but instead has had something horrible happen to her? Perhaps she's been merged with a creation like Hesperos. Goodness knows I'm still wondering about the dread beast Pandæmonium that Themis mentioned in the 6.0 MSQ stinger. La Habrea might have told Erichthonios that she perished, since there's nothing he, with his lack of arcane knowledge and low magical reserves, can do to help. Plus, as his mentor and mother, there would be no way to hide her absence from him. It could be that La Habrea is racing the clock, trying to restore her before this corruption spreads too far. Speaking of La Habrea, there are a lot of Pandæmonium theories circulating around him. Like most of the Ascians, the title La Habrea actually comes from Final Fantasy XII. The entry on the Esper Mateus explains that it was created in opposition to La Habrea, the Abyssal Celebrant. It is from this Esper's glyph that La Habrea's own sigil is taken. There is an intentional connection between La Habrea and Mateus, but how will it play out in Final Fantasy XIV? The entry on Mateus goes on to say, in his cowardice did he bind a goddess of the domain of ice, and using her as a living shield he challenged the gods. While Athena seems to be tied more to light than ice, it's certainly possible they'll borrow from this less literally, making her the goddess bound to some terrible creation, perhaps at Pandæmonium's heart. This could even mirror the tragedy in Final Fantasy IV that Edge had to face, when his parents were transformed into monstrous creatures. But Final Fantasy XII is not the only title where we encounter Mateus the Corrupt, in Japanese, the Corrupt Emperor. He is a direct reference to Final Fantasy II, whose main antagonist was the Emperor of Palamecia, whose name was later given as Mateus. In the original game, killing him sends him to Hell, where he takes over the throne of Castle Pandæmonium. Even more interesting are later versions of the game, where, when killed, he is split into two, the Light Emperor in Heaven and the Dark Emperor in Hell. As for Pandæmonium itself, the word was coined by John Milton in the book Paradise Lost as the name of the city the fallen angels built in Hell when they were cast out of heaven. It means all demons, just as Claudian tells us, solidifying that the ancient language is essentially Greek. If something, or someone, is indeed imprisoned in Pandæmonium's depths, it's possible it is creating its own city in much the same way. In Final Fantasy II, Pandæmonium is the name of the castle ruling over Hell which Emperor Mateus takes over and brings to the surface to destroy the world. In Final Fantasy IX, Pandæmonium is the place where Garland watches over the souls of the Terrans. It is there that Kuja learns he is of no use to Garland and has been replaced, and that he's mortal and will die. Honestly, I will be surprised if Final Fantasy XIV's Pandæmonium does not take at least some themes from all of these. While the raids are stated to be a new story, we can still expect concepts, characters, and ideas from previous games to make an appearance. It may be that, like in Final Fantasy II, something will occur to bring Pandæmonium to the surface, whether in ancient times or in the future. Many people also think that, due to experimentation or the like, La Habrea may have become fragmented in the same fashion as Mateus, with the dark personality trapped away in Pandæmonium, and now beginning to break free. I would also advance a similar theory, that perhaps it is not La Habrea, but Erichthonios who has either a split-off part, an evil twin, or a brother who was created, whether by La Habrea or himself, not born, and is, as a result, soulless, natureless. In the same way that Kuja from Final Fantasy IX felt hatred and jealousy toward his replacement, such an entity would likely hate Erichthonios for his freedom and the love and care of his mother. Returning to the purgation, loneliness, grace, and companionship concepts from Erichthonios' fight, I wonder if he made some mistake when he was very small, perhaps inadvertently creating something terrible. If La Habrea is tied to the concepts of loneliness and purgation, he may have intended to make him deal with his mistake, having Erichthonios learn ethereal shackles so he would be able to keep this thing bound for the safety of the star. Athena's grace and companionship would be creating Pandæmonium. a place where he could keep this dangerous concept, where both he and it need not be alone, where others would assist him in this duty. Alternately, he may be under the effect of some kind of limiter, a protection against something going wrong, or perhaps his theoretical sibling has his reserves. In truth, I would be shocked if a young Erichthonios or one of his parents never tried to augment his low magical reserves, given that he has a proven talent for spellcasting. Those reserves are the main thing holding him back, after all, and who knows what might have gone wrong with such an experiment. On the topic of experiments, what do the warders of Pandæmonium study? Themis tells us the creations held there are important research subjects, and Erichthonios reinforces their importance by his determination to see them safely reinterred, not just put down like beasts. But what qualifies a creation is worth studying. At this point, we only have 3 data points to go from: the hippocampus, the phoenix, and the vrikolakis. As previously discussed, the hippocampus likely alludes to part of the brain, specifically the portion involved in creating memories. The vrikolakis is trickier. It's hard to say where it ends and Hesperos begins, but we know it feeds on ether and has characteristics we associate with vampires in popular media. Post-transformation, Hesperos gives voice to an obsession with La Habrea that was either less all-consuming or at least well hidden before, so perhaps it is to do with setting free suppressed or hidden desires. This gives us memory in the subconscious, but what about the phoenix? Unlike the perfected concept, it is a creature of rage and destruction. Emotion, then, especially strong negative emotion. But there may be more to it than that. The perfected version is a creature with life eternal, and Themis tells us that La Habrea in his words worked tirelessly on it, even as others gave up the concept as impossible. What could have driven him to such lengths to complete it? Many wonder if he intended to use it to revive or save Athena, or even to extend his own life, to be reborn in a sense. I believe there is also an argument to be made for Asphodelos' phoenix being an unintentional manifestation of the man La Habrea becomes by the time of A Realm Reborn. After all, we know that any stray thought while working creation magics can affect the result. What if a stray destructive impulse creates the phoenix we fight? A hint of what will occur once all he knows and loves, to include his son, is taken from him. In fact, what if the purpose of studying the creations in Pandæmonium is to use them as a window into the subconscious? It's possible that they are all accidents created by stray thoughts, and that by analyzing the creations themselves, the researchers are able to learn of what goes on under the surface, so to speak. Some have of course speculated that Erichthonios is to become La Habrea by the end of the raid, but Emmet Selk speaks of La Habrea in the Shadowbringer's MSQ, referencing his fire and passion, and in French, German, and Japanese, specifically calling him old. With the certainty from the short stories Through His Eyes and Ere Our Curtain Falls, that it is Erichthonios' father who made both the perfected phoenix and Ephrata, it doesn't hold up, unless he were to somehow replace his father without even Emmet Selk noticing. In fairness, retcons are never entirely off the table. I personally feel it would be deeply unfortunate to have poor Erichthonios trying so hard to escape his father's shadow only to be dragged into the role in the end, but only time will tell how things end up. A more probable theory is that Claudienne is Erichthonios' sundered soul. They have consistently kept eye color the same between shards. This is how many NPCs on the first were connected with their source shards. And it makes sense, eyes are often called the window to the soul. Data mining has revealed that Claudienne's eyes are the precise same shade of red as Erichthonios'. Of course, in fairness, it should also be mentioned that La Habrea's eyes in the 6.2 patch art look to be the same color, so an argument could be made that perhaps he was sundered to become Claudienne. And what of the titular crystal from beyond? We know nothing of its origin as yet. We've only heard a partial message from it. Where could it have come from? Who could have made it? And how was it propelled to the surface of the ethereal sea directly before Claudienne and his team? Could La Habrea, now returned to the sea by the piercing of Nidhogg's eyes, have sent it to his son? Or is something else at play? We might look back to the constellation crystals from 5.3 for answers. Those crystals were created by the Unsundered to remember and raise up their sundered comrades, as well as to preserve their own memories. As such, it is not the symbol of the one who made it, but the one for whom it was made that is marked on it. We know that Emmet Selk made an Asm crystal in secret, despite the group consensus being against creating it. Could La Habrea not have secretly made one for his son? Wishing to see Erichthonios restored by the rejoining, and whatever memories they had together returned to him, certainly makes a compelling explanation for why he has burned himself to nothing to repair the damage done by the sundering, at least. Fortunately, With the next series of Pandæmonium quests just around the corner, we won't have to wait long for answers to at least some of these questions, as well as 1,000 new questions springing up. I can't wait to see what curveballs will be thrown at us. Goodness knows LoreLines will be diving into that before much longer, so subscribe to the channel and come check out the streams. I'm Neila, signing off.